Hi, welcome to Train Signal. My name's Bill and this lesson is creating site collections. Well, gang, we finally got there. We've been through a lot so far. We've gone ahead and we've created our web applications, and now it's time for us to go ahead and create site collections. Now, we've created two web applications in a previous lesson, one for our GlobalMantics intranet and one for our GlobalMantics My Sites. And in this lesson, we're going to go ahead and create site collections and subsequently some sites under each one of those web applications. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Now remember that a site collection is quite simply a collection of sites. In fact, each site collection can have a staggering 250,000 sites that belong to it. Now, of course, you have to have all of the servers, all of the resources, everything that you need to support that many sites, but that's how many are officially supported by the software. Sites can only belong to one site collection. And all the sites in that site collection must be stored in the same content database. And remember, when we created the web applications, we also created that content database. Site collections share the same owner and administration settings. So what you're going to see as we're creating these site collections is that any settings, any permissions, any services, anything that we apply to that site collection is going to be applied to all the sites, all the sub-sites beneath it. And we say beneath it because remember that a top-level site is always created when you create a site collection. And it's called a top-level site simply because it's the first one. It really doesn't have any more significance or importance than any other site or sub-site, rather, below it. It's just the first one. In fact, let's go ahead and let's take a look. We start with our web application, which of course we've talked about before. We have our site collection, and then we will have that top-level site. And remember, we've said in the past that every site collection has to have at least one site. And below that, of course, can be several sub-sites. In fact, like we said, another 249,000 sub-sites below that top-level site. And all of this is connected to one content database. Now, when creating a site collection, there are three prerequisites that should be in place before you get started. And one, of course, is the web application. That has to be there. Next would be a quota template if you plan to use one. Now, they are not necessary. You don't have to use a quota template, but if you are, you should have it in place before you get started. And we'll take a look at those in just a few moments. And lastly, our managed paths. Now, we haven't talked about managed paths, but we are going to spend a few minutes now going over what they are and their importance to us. So what exactly is a managed path? Well, managed paths are not connected to content, but they are managed locations where content will be created. In other words, we're going to identify exactly where our content is going to live, where it's going to be created, where on that SharePoint server in that content database, SharePoint will be able to find that data. Without managed paths, that content will be created willy-nilly anywhere, all over the place. It'll be impossible to find. Remember, each site collection alone can have up to 250,000 sites. We need to have some order here. These managed paths make it easier for us to find what we're looking for. Now, there are two types of managed paths. Explicit paths, which allow for a single site collection to be created. This doesn't leave us any room to create additional site collections below it, as opposed to a wildcard path, which is designed to allow for child URLs so that we can have unlimited site collections created beneath it. And what we intend to do in this lesson is go ahead and actually use both. We're going to create a site collection using an explicit path and several using the wildcard paths. So hang on there with me. We're just moments away from doing that. All right, let's take a closer look at that managed path. We start out with this URL, and that is the location of our web application. We're going to go ahead and add to it after our /main, and that will be the location of our site collection. And then beyond that, we would add, for example, home and that is the location of our site. So that is our managed path right there, and it's very easy for the servers, for our web browser to go ahead, find the server, find the site collection, find the site. It's very organized, it's very methodical, it's just exactly what we need to go ahead and make sure that we can find things. Alright, let's go ahead now and we're going to talk about what we're going to do with GlobalMantics. Well, how we're going to proceed in our demonstration here. We're going to start with our web application, of course. We already have that intranet.globalmantics.com in place, and we are going to start by creating the first site collection, and that is going to be our basic intranet site collection. It's going to be a place where the whole company can come. They'll find information, news, what's coming up, what's happening, how the company's doing. It's going to be a generic intranet site for everybody, and that is going to be the main site collection, and that is an explicit site collection, so we're not going to allow for any other site collections to be created beneath this. Then we're going to go ahead and create the departments site collection, and that is going to be a wildcard path, managed path. We're going to have a wildcard inclusion so that we can go ahead and create those child URLs and allow for the creation of additional site collections beneath that department site collection. Now, in our example at GlobalMantics, each department wants to have its own site collection. Now, the two that I've listed here are finance and operations, but as you can imagine, IT would have one, HR, products, sales, whatever the different departments are, whatever your organizational needs, they may want to have their own site collection. And again, think about what we've talked about so far. Each site collection has its own owner and administration settings, not to mention its own group of users. So you can already now start to see the value of creating separate site collections. Alright, so let's go ahead now, let's get to it. Let's go ahead and start to create these site collections, and if you're still confused, you're still not exactly sure what we're doing, it's all going to become clear once you see it in action. So here we are back at Central Administration, and we're going to start by going to Application Management and right to Managed Web Applications. Alright, we see our 4 web applications, and up here on the ribbon we see Managed Paths, but when we go ahead to hover over it, it's grayed out and we see that this control is currently disabled. Well, that's because we haven't selected the web application that we want to create that managed path for. And let's take a quick look over here. You see, here's the beginning of our managed path. That's our URL for our web application. So let's go ahead, let's select our GlobalMantics intranet, and you'll see our ribbon lights up, and now we can go ahead and select Manage Paths. And you see it brings us here to our Define Managed Paths page. Now, we have 2 options, explicit inclusion and wildcard inclusion. Root, which is in parentheses, which isn't going to show up as root. That's just going to put that site collection in the root of our URL, right at the top of our web application. And we could do that, and that would be fine. But we want to go ahead and we want to designate 2 different paths. We're going to start by creating that one for main. And we said that this was going to be an explicit inclusion, so we need to go ahead and go down here and choose explicit inclusion, and we can check the URL. Now I know we're going to be fine because we haven't created any paths so far, but it'll check to make sure that we haven't already used this path somewhere else. It's going to ask me to sign in. Well, in most cases you might think, uh-oh, what went wrong? In our case, that's a good thing. That's exactly what we wanted. Because if it took us to a page, we'd have been in trouble. We would have had to go ahead and figure out another path. But we're okay. There is no path called intranet.globalmantics.com/main. So we are going to now go ahead and create one. So let's add the path. And see that? There it is. Explicit inclusion, main, perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now we're going to go ahead and create that second one, and this is going to be the one for departments. And this is going to be our wildcard inclusion. Now we can check the URL and it'll run us through the same process. But again, like I said, I know that we didn't have to worry about that because we haven't created any paths. So let's create that path, and there you have it. So now we have sites, which is the default, root, which is a default explicit, main, which is our explicit, and wildcard inclusion. That looks great. We are ready to go. So now what we want to do is, let's go back to application management, site collections, and create site collections. Now we start at the top where we look at the web application. Now it's already selected on our intranet.globalmantics.com, which is exactly what we want, but if we click on that little arrow and choose change web application, we can select any of the other web applications that we want to create that site collection in. But we're okay leaving it right here at our intranet. That's what we've been doing. We're going to give this a title. Let's go ahead and let's call this one GlobalMantics Main Intranet. And we could give it a description if we needed. Now, the website address, our URL, this is our path. And you'll notice by default it is set to sites. And remember that sites, when we looked at our managed paths, was a wildcard inclusion. Now, that's not what we want for this site collection. So we'll select the drop down, and there are the other choices. Main and departments. These are the two that we created, and of course this one is the root. Now if we select the root, that's going to be the path. That is, remember, an explicit, so nothing else will be able to be created underneath it. But we wanted to have main. We created that managed path for that main GlobalMantics intranet site. So that's what we want. And you'll notice here, if we had forgotten to define our managed paths, we could go ahead and click back here, and it would take us there. Right back to where we were, but we're okay. We already did that. Now, because that was an explicit managed path, when we come back to create our departments site collection and we select this drop-down, main is not going to be available for us anymore. We've already used it. We only get to use it once. Remember, we talked about explicit paths not allowing for the creation of additional site collections. So we will not have this available to us ever again. All right, now we can select the version that we're going to use. And if we were combining SharePoint farms or servers and we still were using 2010 somewhere, we would have to go ahead and do that. But we don't. This is a brand new farm. This is our very first site collection. So we can leave it right where we want it at 2013. Now this is where we're going to create that first site. And remember, we talked about every site collection that's created has to have a top level site. It's created automatically. Now I can go ahead and I can click on any of these tabs and you'll see I have a number of site templates, of course except for custom because we haven't created any. But even if I didn't select any site template, it's still going to create a site for me. It's going to create this team site because that's the one that's selected by default. And remember, every time we create that site collection, it's going to create a site as well. So we're fine with the team site. We're going to leave it there. And let's go down here and let's select our primary and secondary site collection administrators. Now, our site collection administrator is a little bit different than our site owner. The site collection administrator is somebody who's going to have a little bit more elevated permissions. They're going to have a little bit more administrative responsibilities. So you probably want a legitimate admin. Whereas your site owner is probably more of a power user or the person who's in charge of the team who's using that site. So you most likely want to go ahead with somebody that knows a little bit more about the administration of SharePoint. So we are going to choose, I already have a number of people in our Active Directory. I'm going to use Jennifer Owens. She is one of our IT managers. She is going to be our primary site collection administrator, and then of course for secondary I'm going to simply use myself. Beautiful, looks good. Now let's go ahead and let's talk about quota templates. If we go over here and take a look at our options, the only option that we have is personal site, and we're not going to use that. That's more for the My Sites. but we have not defined any quota templates, but we can. Let's go ahead and click on Manage Quota Templates so we can talk about this. And we'll see that we have the ability to select an existing template. And again, the only one in here is the My Site. We can create a new quota template. And we have the ability to limit how much storage is allowed on that site. And we can set up warnings, email warnings, when our site storage limits get close. We can also go ahead and limit whether sandbox solutions with code are allowed for this site collection. And we can say how many points, and again set up email warnings. Now, we're not concerned with quota templates. We're not going to set any up, but I wanted to show you that you have the ability to do that. So let's go ahead, and you see that when we go back, everything that we have done is gone, which is why earlier I told you if you want to go ahead and have a quota template, you probably want it in place first. And we were going to name the site GlobalMantic's main intranet. There we go. Our URL, our path is going to be main, team site, and once again, Jennifer Owens and myself. Great. And no quota templates. All right. I think we're ready to go. Make sure everything is good. Let's click OK. And you'll see it's working. It's waiting. There we go. Working on it. Shouldn't take long. Famous last words. All right. You know the drill. This is where we go ahead and we pause the video. And we'll be right back when it's done. And we're back. And I told you that was going to be quick, didn't I? And I know, in spite of the miracle of video editing, it really was quick. It only took a few minutes for that to happen. And if we scroll over, we see that our top level site was successfully created. And that's great. And we see here that we can go ahead and return to central administration by clicking on OK. Or if we click on this link here, which we're going to do, we can go ahead and see that site. And you'll see it's working on it, and that's okay. We'll let it do its thing. And there it is, our GlobalMantic's main intranet site collection with the top-level team site created. How about that? That worked really well. That was great. It was very easy. And remember, this is an explicit managed path, so we have no place to go ahead and create other site collections beneath this one. All right, so let's go. Let's close this one up. Let's go back to central administration. Create site collections. We're going to go ahead and we are going to create that site collection using that wildcard managed path so that we can create additional site collections. We're already here at our web application, intranet.globalmantics.com, and we're going to start. This first one is going to be for our finance department. So we'll call this one GlobalMantics Finance. And when we look for our paths, sites again is the default, but notice that main is gone. Remember, that was an explicit path, so it has disappeared. We can't use that one anymore, but departments is still there. And because that was a wildcard path, when we come back again, that'll still be there. And this is going to be finance. And this one, again, we'll leave it as a team site 2013. We're going to specify the same site collection administrators. No quota templates. Choose OK. And once more, we will have to wait while it works on it. So I will be right back. And there we have our top level site has been successfully created. And look at our URL, intranet.globalmantics.com/departments/finance. And when we click on it, there is our site collection with our top level team site for GlobalMantics Finance. And again, we see our URL, our managed path. All right, we can close that, go back to central administration, and let's do one more. just so that we have a couple of different site collections. This one we said was going to be for operations. And when we go back to select our path, we see sites is still there, main is still gone, and departments is still there. Again, the beauty of having that wildcard path. This is going to be operations. And again, this is all fine. Same process. Just wanted you to be able to see that that wildcard path is still there. And once more, it's going to be working on it. So we'll take a few minutes to wait. Intranet.globalmatics.com, departments, operations, and when we click on that, we see there it is, our team site, our top level team site on our GlobalMatics operations site collection, and there is our URL up there. Great, look at that, 3 for 3. That was pretty good. Let's go ahead and let's go back to Central Administration, Application Management, and let's go ahead and view all site collections. And now we see the 3 site collections that we just created for this web application: finance, operations, main, and it gives us a little bit of information about each one of them. And if we wanted to change the web application, we could certainly go back here and see where we have other web applications. All right, pretty successful. But we're not done yet. We still have one more site collection that we have to go ahead and create. All right, we're back at Central Administration, and we have decided here at GlobalMatics that we are going to allow for our users to have their own My Site site collections. We're going to allow people to create their My Sites. My Sites are great. There's a lot of wonderful social features in SharePoint 2013, and we'll take a look at all of those in future lessons. But in order to allow this, in order to make this happen, we have to have a separate web application just for our My Sites. And we do. We already have that. That's already in place. We created that My Site web application in a previous lesson. So let's go ahead. Now we need to create the My Site host site collection. Let's click on Manage Web Applications and select our My Site web application. And we see our URL is mysites.globalmatics.com. And our My Sites are actually individual site collections for each of our users. So we have to add a managed path that is a wildcard inclusion path that will allow for the creation of multiple site collections. Remember, we talked about that previously. So let's go up to Managed Paths, and we're going to add a new wildcard inclusion path. Now, it is true, yes, we could use sites, but for the My Sites, I like to go ahead and create one called Personal, and the type is a wildcard inclusion. That's great. Let's add the path. There we go. We're all set. Now, we need to go ahead and turn on self-service site creation. What is that, you ask? This gives our users the ability to create their My Site site collections. And we have to make sure that this is on so that that can happen. So let's go click on that. And you see our first option is, do we want to allow our users to create those site collections in a defined URL namespace? In other words, by selecting on, we're going to let people create their My Sites under that mysites.globalmatics.com/personal host site collection. All of the site collections will be underneath that. We don't want to apply a quota. We don't need that. But we also have the ability here to start a site. We can give people the option to create their own team sites as subsites to their individual My Site site collection. And maybe that's something you want, maybe that's something you don't. think about that for a minute. If you're going to allow people to create team sites uncontrollably, your SharePoint My Sites might start to grow really fast and get out of hand before you know it. For us here at GlobalMantics, we're going to turn that off. We're going to make sure that that option is hidden from our users because we don't want them to be able to create team sites in their My site collections. But if we did, we have options. We could go ahead and specify a particular managed path where those sites would be created, or you could go ahead and let them choose which managed path they wanted to create it under. And we also have some other settings, classification, and the ability to make sure they add a secondary site collection administrator. But these are all grayed out because we have chosen to hide the ability to create team sites underneath the site collection. So we're good with what we have. We're good with our choices here. We'll choose OK. And oh no! Sorry, something went wrong. Oh my gosh, what happened? I know, can you hear the sarcasm? I knew that was going to happen. We haven't seen this yet so far. Throughout the whole course, everything's been going great. We've had no problems. But sometimes we learn more by doing the wrong thing and then understanding why that happened and making sure it doesn't happen again. Let's take a look at this. Sorry, something went wrong. We cannot enable site creation because there is no site collection at the root on the web application. That's right. All we've done is create a managed path under our My Site web application. We have not created that My Site host site collection. So SharePoint can't turn on self-service site creation because there's no host. There's no My Site site collection. So what we have to do before we turn on self-site creation is create that My Site host, and it has to be created in the root of our My Site web application. Remember, that's what it said on that error message. So let's go ahead and let's do that right now. Let's go back to Application Management and create a new site collection. Make sure we're in the web application My Sites. And let's give this one a name. And of course, it is the My Site host, so that's what we're going to call it. And we see our personal path that we created, and you want to check that, don't you? You really want to check that. I know you do. But that would not be what we wanted. We need to remember what it said on that error message. The My Site host site collection has to be created in the root of our web application. It has to be up here at the root, mysites.globalmantics.com. So that is where we're creating that My Site host. Now, we still need to go ahead and select a template. Do we want to make a team site, a blog, a developer? No. The My Site host, and let's go to our Enterprise tab, has to be the My Site host site template. It can't be anything else. It won't work. You have to choose this one, or you're not going to have any success. It even says a site used for hosting personal sites, My Sites, and the public people profile page. This template needs to be provisioned only once per user profile service application. Now don't worry about the user profile service application yet. We're going to cover that in great detail in a later lesson. Let's go ahead and let's add our admins, Jen Owens, of course, and myself. No quota template. Let's choose OK. And it's working on it, so we'll pause here and we'll be right back when it's done. And there we are. Our My Site host site collection has been created successfully. Let's go take a look at it. Hey, wait a minute. This page can't be displayed. What went wrong? Nothing went wrong. We're fine. The problem is that it's the My Site host site collection. So there's not really a site as we know it. It's not a team site. It's not a blog. It's just that My Site host, and it isn't really something we can reach out and take a look at least not as a site. But if we go back to Application Management and view all site collections, we are in our My Site web application. We see there it is. There is that My Site host, that root site collection that we just created. So that's good. That's what we wanted. So everything worked just the way we said it would. So let's go back to creating site collections. Actually, that's not what we wanted. We need to go back to Application Management, Manage Web Applications. Go back to our My Site web application, and now we can go ahead and turn on self-service site creation, and when we choose OK, no error message. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Bill, why did we create this managed path for personal if we didn't use it? And you know what? That's a really good question. We don't use this here, but when we go ahead and configure our user profile service application, we're going to need to tell it at that point to use the mysite.globalmatics.com/personal wildcard inclusion site to create those my sites under. So we wanted to make sure that we had that in place first before we got to that point, and then we're like, oh no, I didn't do this. So we are set. We are good to go. Let's go back and take a look at what we did. Create our site collections. Well, that's not where we wanted to go. We wanted to view all site collections. So we created this root site collection for our my site host. And if we change our web application and go back to our GlobalMatics intranet, we see that we created 3 site collections. Our main intranet site collection and 2 separate site collections for individual departments, one for operations and one for finance. So we created 4 site collections in this lesson, each of which has their own purpose and a little bit of a slight difference in the requirements that we needed to create them. All in all, a good lesson, lots of good stuff. We are really in a great position now to move forward using our SharePoint sites and configuring service applications. But that's it for this lesson. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.